President Donald Trump and his administration would support Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria if Israel properly explained how crucial it is. Just like the US president originally didn't understand the importance of getting the hostages home, he later made it the most important issue in the war. If Israel explains why we need sovereignty, the US president would get on board. This story and much more coming up on this week's Judeacation. Shalom, folks. Welcome back to Judeacation here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Haston, correspondent for JNS News. I am in the JNS Media Hub in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. And the top story this week, I wrote about this on JNS.org. Minister Bezalel Smotrich explaining why President Trump might not support sovereignty at this juncture, but maybe down the road, and I'll explain why. So according to Minister Smotrich, if President Trump and his administration understood how crucial sovereignty is for the future of the state of Israel, he might get on board. This according to Bezalel Smotrich. Speaking in front of a Jewish and Christian audience this past week, I actually was in attendance, Smotrich profusely thanked President Trump for his support of Israel, calling him a messenger of God. He said if President Trump doesn't understand that being on Israel's side means supporting sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, we can't blame him. The minister drew a comparison between Trump's current stance on sovereignty and his views regarding the hostages held by Hamas when he assumed office this past January. Trump didn't originally understand how important it was for Israel to get back the hostages. He didn't know why we insisted on this, according to Smotrich. The minister said that President Trump just wanted Israel to open the gates of hell on Gaza, finish the war, and so what if the hostages didn't come back? These are Bezalel Smotrich's words. He said it was the campaign led by the Hostages Forum and the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, who explained and convinced President Trump that being on Israel's side meant supporting the return of the hostages. Therefore, Israel must help Trump understand that being on Israel's side this time means supporting the implementation of sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. He said, I'm 100% certain if we persevere in this, in the Knesset, in the streets, through the media, in the legal realm, President Trump and his staff would understand how crucial, how important, and how positive this move is, and how this establishes our rights to all of the land of Israel. In other words, Judea and Samaria is just as important as Tel Aviv, and if we explain it properly, Bezalel Smotrich, the minister, is confident President Trump will understand this as well. That being said, the finance minister emphasized that implementing sovereignty is not conditional on Trump's support. In other words, we want Trump's support, we appreciate President Trump's support, but it's not conditional. It's going to happen anyway. But as Bezalel Smotrich shared, originally, the Americans back in the 80s did not accept Israel implementing sovereignty, or if you want to call it annexation at that time, over the Golan Heights. It did not accept back in the early 80s the implementation of sovereignty or annexation of Jerusalem. Yet during President Trump's first term, the U.S. government accepted the Golan Heights being forever part of the state of Israel and Jerusalem. So Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich confident that if we do a good job on our end, President Trump will get on board. Also this week in the news, Israeli authorities have rearrested a Palestinian terrorist released from prison a few months ago as part of the hostage deal with Hamas. According to the police spokesperson's office, he was taken into custody on suspicion of bomb making. Detectives from the Judea District Crime Fighting Unit and National Counter-Terrorism Unit officers raided the home of the suspect in Bethlehem this past Wednesday night and detained him for questioning. The terrorist was initially arrested about a year ago after being caught with 25 explosive devices on him, prompting a major criminal investigation. So here you have a terrorist who was released in the hostage deal, rearrested this week, and from what I understand, he was going to carry out a mega terrorist attack using bombs at Rachel's tomb. That's just outside of Jerusalem, right here, very close to Derech Hebron Road here in Jerusalem, northern Bethlehem, if you will. He was going to carry this out today, here on Sunday. Today is the yortzeit for Rachel, our mother Rachel. And the tomb of Rachel, just outside of Jerusalem and Beit Lechem, thousands of people come to visit Kever Rachel, Rachel's tomb, on the Askara, or the yortzeit of our mother Rachel, wife of Jacob. And he was planning a mega attack. That's how sick these people are. Trying to murder Jews at our holy sites on essentially a holiday, on a special day. And again, folks, of course, I'm glad the hostages are home, but this is the price we paid. And many knew this was going to happen. Terrorists going back to terrorism, released from Israeli prisons, automatically going back to terrorism just a few days later. We all knew this was going to happen, and thank God in this case, the terrorist attack was thwarted, and this terrorist was rearrested. Now, several weeks ago, we talked about the olive harvest throughout Judea and Samaria, and according to this report from this week, olive harvest anarchists are going to be deported. Two Jewish American women who were participating in an initiative to help Arab olive growers harvest their crop in the northern Samaria area were detained and are being processed for deportation from Israel. The two women, along with 9 other activists, were detained by the IDF in the village of Burin, that's under PA control, which was recently declared a closed military zone. This is the second incident in 2 weeks in which activists, I call them agricultural terrorists really, supporting the olive growers, have been detained for entering a closed military zone. One of the women was just out of high school, another one was in her 50s, I believe. And this is an initiative of this group called Rabbis for Human Rights or whatnot. But this is more proof it's not about olive harvests. It's about endangering the lives of our soldiers, entering a closed military zone. It's about trying to make the soldiers and Israel look bad by claiming they're just innocents trying to help with the harvest. They are trying to provoke, trying to get a reaction so they can go online and claim Israel isn't letting Arabs harvest their crops. That's what this is all about. And we see this every single year. Isn't this game getting old? For them, of course not. They will do anything to make Israel look bad. And as I've said, thanks to those haters, the next jihadist terrorist, God forbid, will use something like this as an excuse. Not the true reason, but an excuse to carry out an attack. He or she will say, I did it for the olive people. I did it for those 2 anarchists. They won't call them anarchists. They will say, we did it for those 2 activists. And that is why this is such a problem. When these anarchists and extremists come over and go into closed military zones or approach Jewish communities, try to disturb the sanctity of Shabbat, or even if it's during the week, they inspire the next terrorists. They give them a reason to go out and carry out attacks, an excuse really to go out and carry out attacks. And these people should be deported who come over here and carry this out. And of course, the others are waiting by, standing by with their video cameras, and they only record the Israeli response. They only record the IDF response, and then they claim that they were beaten, they were assaulted, the IDF wasn't nice to them, and carried all these horrible things. And they share it then on social media and blame Israel and blame the IDF. And that's why it is so important to take care of this nonsense, to take care of this not only annoyance and these disruptive people who are breaking the law, entering closed military zones, but we have to make sure that they are unable to carry out these types of activities and inspire the next terrorist. And that's the most important thing here. Under the guise, the excuse, the cover of wanting to help Arabs harvest their olives. I guarantee you, if Arabs are out there harvesting their olives on their own, without these insiders, without these people, they'll be able to do so peacefully without incident. The AP this week reports that since the outbreak of the war in Gaza, Israel has erected nearly 1,000 barriers in cities and towns in what they call the West Bank. I call Judea and Samaria. A Palestinian Authority body reports. So the first thing, we have to take it with a grain of salt. The fact that a PA body is reporting this, that's no different than Hamas and the so-called health ministry in Gaza, for example, of reporting something, has to be taken with a grain of salt. But according to this Wall and Settlement Resistance Commission, I guess that's some PA body, 916 gates, barriers, and walls have been installed since the October 7, 2023 attack on Israel. Among the new barriers are metal gates stationed at many village and town entrances and between cities. They say blocking access in and out. Sometimes the military is stationed at them. Arabs say the gates have erratic opening hours, with some staying shut for days. Some people sleep at friends' or relatives' homes or go around the gates on foot. So here you have this whole sob story as reported by the AP. According to Israel's military, the gates are not meant to restrict people, but rather to manage and monitor. Other barriers include concrete blocks placed along sidewalks to prevent car ramming attacks frequently launched against Israeli soldiers and civilians. A military official said Israeli forces operate under a complex security reality in Judea and Samaria, where terrorists embed themselves within the population, and accordingly, there are dynamic checkpoints and ongoing efforts to monitor movements in various areas. So number one, I think we learned from October 7th that barriers and gates aren't reliable. Or maybe I should say we didn't learn at all, and that's why we're putting up these barriers or gates. But that's besides the point. Why is this news? Why is Israel trying to protect Israelis? Why does that become news in the Associated Press? Because this story makes Israel look bad. Look how terrible Israel is putting up these fences, putting up these barriers. The article doesn't talk about the purpose of the barriers until paragraph number 4. You can check it out online. It quotes the Arab side or the anti-fence side in the first 3 paragraphs, and only then in paragraph 4, after everyone has stopped reading, mentions the IDF and the reason for these barriers. To be clear, as I just said a few minutes ago, I don't like fences. Some communities in Judea and Samaria don't have fences at all because, number one, fences don't necessarily equal security, as was the case on October the 7th. And number two, why should we have to live behind fences? Let the terrorists live behind the fences and not us. In addition, a fence demarcates a boundary. If you build a fence, how are you going to expand your community? But all of that being said, the reason for this article isn't to talk about how fences are bad for Jews, but rather the goal is to make Israel and the Jews look bad for self-defense and putting up any obstacles to terrorism. These aren't obstacles to peace. These aren't obstacles to people having access to move around, to go farm their land, to move from community to community. It's not something Israel likes. It's not something Israel wants. And it's not doing it because these people are Arabs. It has to do with the fact that Israel is trying to protect our citizens, our soldiers. It's erecting these protective structures at strategic points, bus stops and whatnot throughout Judea and Samaria to prevent car rammings, to prevent terrorists to have access to the main thoroughfare so they can't throw their firebombs, so they can't throw their rocks, so they can't physically approach the main highways in Judea and Samaria. And again, I don't like fences. They're not the answer. They're not the solution. They're a Band-Aid. And as we saw on the 7th of October, they don't work. But that being said, the Associated Press is deliberately trying to paint Israel in a bad light, trying to paint Judea and Samaria in a bad light. And that's the point of writing this article, that there are nearly 1,000 new barriers put up through Judea and Samaria. So remember what their goal is, and remember how our goal, even if I don't believe in the methodology here or the means, our goal is to protect the citizens of the state of Israel, Jews, Arabs, Christians alike. Let's stick with the media here and talk about how the New York Times teaches you how to justify murder. Let's talk about this article. The headline this week: Israel conducts first airstrike in West Bank in months and kills 3. That's the headline from the New York Times. The subheadline: a militant group aligned with Hamas confirmed the deaths, which were part of an increase in fighting in the Palestinian territory during a surge of settler violence. There's that terminology. There's the phrase, settler violence. Let's take that same incident, and this is how Israel, or in this case, Ynet, reported on what happened. Terror attack foiled near Jenin. You see how different that is? Terror attack foiled near Jenin. Police commandos kill 2 terrorists. Doesn't even say terrorists above. Air Force strikes hideout. Compare those 2 headlines. Should I read the first one again? Israel conducts first airstrike in West Bank in months and kills 3 versus terror attack foiled near Jenin. Look at the difference there. And as Ynet reports, Israeli forces foiled a planned terror attack near Jenin, killing 2 terrorists in a joint Yamam and Air Force operation in Hebron and Dura. Troops uncovered weapons, workshops, and arrested suspects for inciting terror online. So again, the New York Times doesn't tell you these were terrorists killed on their way to murder Israelis. The New York Times said this was fighting, if you caught that, as if 2 sides are morally equivalent. Crime and punishment is not fighting. Self-defense and carrying out targeted strike before terrorists can go murder Jews is not fighting between 2 sides. And number 3, they make it sound like these militants, of course, are militant because of settler violence. The strike by the IDF, taking out 3 terrorists on their way to murder Jews, has nothing to do with so-called settler violence. There's no connection between the two or the myth of settler violence. This is a targeted strike to save Jewish lives. It has nothing to do. And even more so, this part here is justifying murder. It's basically saying Jews are being violent in Judea and Samaria, and therefore these people have the right to go out, these jihadists have the right to go out and try to murder Jews because it's all because of settler violence. It justifies their intended actions. It justifies the fact that these terrorists in Jenin were about to go into, I don't know where, Tel Aviv, Netanya, Jerusalem, and murder Jews. And that's why this article is so infuriating, especially the headline, which doesn't mention terrorists, which only talks about settler violence, which makes it look like it was just fighting between 2 sides, and it leaves out the fact that this was an anti-terror military operation, pinpointed military operation conducted by the IDF. I've said this 1,000 times, the pen is mightier than the sword. And when you write headlines like this, and you include fake news and don't report it as it is, it essentially justifies terrorism, paints Israel in a negative light, and those who don't understand the realities of the situation coming out thinking that Israel, for no reason whatsoever, is just going in and randomly taking out Arabs in Jenin. You have to get the news accurate. You have to get it right. You have to explain what it is and go back and check out the difference between what Ynet wrote and what the New York Times wrote, justifying murder, justifying terrorism, and trying to equate anti-terror activity with the act or attempted act of terrorism itself. Absolutely despicable reporting there, and it just harms the residents of Judea and Samaria in name, and we should not have to settle for bad news journalism. And that's going to do it for today's Judeacation here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Haston, correspondent for JNS News, coming to you from the JNS Media Hub in Jerusalem. I want to thank the people behind the scenes, station manager Yuri Svertsky, Ryan Lishitz, Zach Stickerman, and Esther Eden. Make sure you go to JNS TV on YouTube for all of this amazing content, and go to jns.org for all the latest breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world.